Prologue. Moonlight shimmered lightly on the forest floor. A young demon peered between the green leaves. 12 Corenos sat behind him, shifting nervously. One of the younger ones snapped the smallest of twigs and yelped, looking at the demon with fear. He rolled his eyes in annoyance. The Corenos were part human and part leopard. They had cat ears, claws, and even the tails, but they were as smart as rocks. Their stupidity annoyed the demon greatly, but they were necessary tools, so he didn't complain. Out loud, anyway. "Move around to the road's edges," he hissed at the Corenos to his right. "Don't make any noise, and keep your weapons at the ready. If I find any of them escaped, you will be the first one I kill." The Corenos, his name was Slash, gulped and nodded his head vigorously. In a series of growls and hisses, he relayed the message to the other dark figures. Hurrying, they spread out on both sides of the forest road. Much to the demon's annoyance, they were very loud and very clumsy. Then the animals stopped moving, and the forest grew quiet once more. Minutes passed, then hours, yet there was still no movement on the road. The demon was about to call them off when Slash suddenly pricked his feline ears. Listening more intently, he heard what his lieutenant had already heard, the soft sound of hooves drumming in the distance. The demon smiled, and then nodding to Slash, he shrank back into the shadows, hiding in the darkness. The sound of the pounding hooves grew louder until at last the Corenos could see 7 cloaked riders on pure white stallions galloping down the trail. Slash narrowed his eyes and growled. He hated the sight of those riders. There were 3 riders in the lead, with spears in their hands and hard, calculating looks on their faces. Each one wore full body armor that had an elegant design to it. At the rear of the group were 3 more riders of similar appearance. Instead of spears, though, their hands rested on sheathed swords tied to their saddles. One had her sword drawn and lying across her lap. The sword was startling white from hilt to blade tip, with veins of black along the guard and the blade. While these riders were impressive to look at, the one that caught Slash's eye was the center rider. She was one of the 2 women in the group, yet she was clearly in charge. She sat tall in the saddle, and a silver ring ran around her forehead to an amethyst jewel that rested at the center. She held a silver bow in her left hand, her right resting on the quiver of arrows on her saddle, along with something else. Also tied to her saddle was a small pack that seemed to glow with energy. Slash purred in satisfaction. Their target had arrived just as the demon said it would. Notching an arrow onto his black bow, Slash aimed for the lead spearman and fired. His arrow whistled through the air and struck the man in the neck. Gasping, he fell to the ground, twitched once, and died. Then chaos erupted as the rest of the Corenos unleashed their arrows on the riders and their steeds. One of the swordsmen leaped off his horse and raced towards the bushes. An arrow sped straight toward him, but he slashed it out of the air with unnatural speed. He sliced any arrow that came towards him, though he could not stop any that were not aimed for him. Another spearman fell under the volley and slumped limply in his saddle. The lady in the group's center was thrown from her horse as it reared onto its hind legs. With a high-pitched screech, it leaped forward and sped away from the fight. The woman looked after it from the ground, then glanced at the final spearman. He, in turn, jumped from his horse and ran to the lady with the white sword. "Go!" he screamed to her. "Go and don't look back!" The woman had a pained look on her face, but she nodded and snapped the horse's reins. The horse whinnied and galloped after its companion, 3 Corenos trailing it closely. Watching them go, the woman and the spearman turned to face the remaining enemies. 3 horses were dead, and the remaining 2 were wheeling about in terror. One of the swordsmen lay on the ground, dead, and the one who had assaulted the bushes was gasping for air on the ground with an arrow through his side. The lady and the spearman were the only ones left standing. No more arrows filled the clearing, and for the slightest moment the woman had a twinge of hope that the assailants were gone. They were not quite so lucky. Stalking out of the shadows, the demon unsheathed a long, black sword, its edges sharp and jagged. Coming up to the fallen swordman, he stabbed him in the gut. The man gasped once, then breathed no more. Leaving his sword in the body, the demon took out a bow and a single arrow. Would you believe, he said in a honey-sweet voice, that your friend who rode away on the horse was safe, or do you think she is still in trouble? He looked at them, obviously waiting for a reply. When none was forthcoming, he spoke a single word. The woman shivered at the sound, and she saw her companion's hand tighten around the spear he held. Neither of the two understood the strange word, but the demon still grinned in satisfaction. Notching the arrow, he said to them, "If you believed your friend was safe, you were dead wrong." Letting the arrow fly, it swerved through the trees like a hand was guiding it. The woman's heart almost stopped. "What did you do?" Her whisper seemed loud in the once more quiet forest. "I simply sent the arrow after your little friend. You see, that arrow cannot be stopped until it has burrowed itself into the flesh of its target. Pretty gruesome, wouldn't you say?" He chuckled to himself, then tossed his bow away. Grabbing the hilt of his sword, he drew it from the dead man's body. Slowly, he walked toward the two remaining people. The woman removed the bag from behind her back and held it close to her chest. The demon smiled in surprise. He thought that the bag was still on the horse's saddle. "This makes it so much easier," he thought. Stepping closer, he held out his hand to the woman. "Be a good little girl and hand me that bag. My master is so upset that you have not shared it with him. It would be in your best interest not to make him wait any longer." Lines appearing on her bare brow, the woman glared at the man with fury. "I would rather die." "What a shame," he said. "I would have spared you and your friend here some agony, but I guess that was inevitable." As fast as lightning, he charged the woman and stabbed her in the chest. Her eyes went wide and blood trickled from her mouth. Her companion howled in grief as she slowly sank to the floor. A hard look on his face, the demon picked up the saddlebag and opened it. The spearman went to the woman's side. Slash and the remaining Kuranos slithered out of the trees, stopping behind the demon. The remaining rider had tears down his face, and he was clutching the woman's hand. He looked up in shock at the demon's bellow. He had a murderous look on his face, and he threw the glowing bag at the woods. Spinning toward the rider, he snapped his fingers, and Slash pounced on him with a snarl. The man let out a yelp as the creature's claws sank into his chest. "Where is it?" The demon towered over the man. The man didn't utter a word. Glancing at Slash's upturned face, the demon nodded. Without a sound, the Kuranos sank his fang into the man's shoulder. The warrior wrenched in pain and screamed till his voice cracked. "Where is it?" the demon repeated. The man looked him in the eye. "I'll never tell you." "You'll be sorry for that," the demon spat. Taking the hilt of his sword, he rammed it into the side of the man's head, causing him to black out instantly. Slash nimbly jumped off the man's chest, only to trip over his feet at the demon's call. "Slash!" "Yes, my lord?" "Take 2 of your trackers with you and find the other woman. She must be the one with the crystals." Slash nodded, but didn't move. Furious, the demon smacked him across the face. "Don't just stand there, you idiot! Go!" Slash stumbled again, then roared at 2 of his companions. Joining him, the 3 looked to the trees, sniffing the air and pricking their ears. They all flinched as a piercing scream rang through the forest. Slash turned and looked at the demon. "That was the arrow meeting its target, Slash," the demon said with a hint of annoyance. "Go in the direction it came from. Now!" With a yelp, Slash and his companions leaped into the trees. The demon glared down at the dead woman's body. Then turning to the remaining Kuranos, he said, "Tie up the man and bring him with you back to the castle, and do it quickly." The 3 young men nodded vigorously and started to bind the man's hands and feet. Carrying him between them, they bounded off into the forest in the direction of the castle. Breathing heavily, the demon looked around at the clearing. The final horses had left, and the fallen riders and their steeds lay in pools of crimson blood. Normally, the demon would have loved the sight of a fallen enemy, but now was not a time he could afford to. If his master learned that the crystals were not in his possession, he would certainly be punished. With a flick of his wrist, the clearing erupted into flames. The carnage burned in the searing heat. The demon grinned and pleasure. Now no one would ever know that anything had happened to the riders. With a final snort, he turned and stalked back into the trees, leaving the fire to burn at his own accord.